Hi, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on when you're joining us. And welcome to our webinar today. Next slide, please. Welcome again to our webinar, Advanced Skills in Supported Employment webinar series. This is session 1, Inclusive Work Cultures, Assessing for Fit. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, and we're housed at Rutgers in the School of Health Professions in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. My name is Katy Rivera, and I'm the project coordinator of this center, and we'll be introducing our webinar speaker today. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health workforce to deliver evidence-based and promising practices to individuals with mental health conditions. We also address the full continuum of services spanning mental illness prevention. On your screen, we invite you to sign up to receive our newsletter. You may do so by clicking the link that we will share in the chat box. Next slide, please. We also would like to kindly ask that you participate in our feedback surveys. Following this webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey. We value your feedback and use it to improve our activities and inform future activities. The surveys are also important because our continued funding is linked to them, so we thank you in advance for the completion. Next slide, please. We also would like to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website within 7 days as along with webinar materials. Next slide, please. At the time of this presentation, Marian Delphin Rittman served as Acting Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use at SAMHSA. The opinions expressed herein are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA. No official support or endorsement of DHHS or SAMHSA for the opinions described in this presentation is intended or should be inferred. Next slide, please. We encourage you to interact with our presenter during the webinar by using the chat feature. Please post any comments or questions you have in the chat, and I will collect your questions as we go and ask them of the presenter during the Q&A time towards the end of the presentation. During this webinar, our presenter may pose questions to you, so please use the chat feature to answer them. Next slide, please. We also want to remind you of the 988 Suicide and Crisis Hotline, Lifeline. And this is for people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, mental health, substance use, or crisis, emotional distress, or people concerned about someone in crisis. We also would like to remind you that the MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. Next slide. Now let's begin our webinar. We have Joni Dolce with us today. Joni is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions at Rutgers School of Health Professions. Joni has several years of experience working in behavioral healthcare settings, namely supported employment. Joni teaches courses in the department's undergraduate program, as well as provides training and technical assistance to behavioral healthcare providers. Her research interests include staff training and employment services. She presents nationally on the topic of employment services and is listed as a Society for Human Resource Management recommended speaker on the topic of creating workplaces that support mental health. Again, I'd like to welcome everyone, and I will turn it over to Joni.
Thank you, Kati. Welcome, everyone. Today's objectives are we're going to look at what features of workplaces that are inclusive of individuals with mental health conditions. We're also going to describe methods to assess work culture, and we're going to do a modified work culture analysis. So welcome, everyone. Excited to be here. Just to kind of give a little bit of background of the importance of understanding work culture. When we understand the job seekers and employers' needs, this leads to a better job match. We can visualize the information that we obtain about the job seeker and employer's needs as leading to the development of the job search and job development plan, and ultimately the job match. Consider what led you to the job that you're currently in. How did you find an employment setting that included your values, your skills, and your interests? How did you come about that information? You can use the chat if you want to type in kind of what was it that drew you to your current employment setting? How did you know that the setting included your skills and values and interests? And how did you find out that information? Just spend a quick minute or so if you wanted to write that in the chat. I know for me, for my current setting, I was familiar with some other coworkers and colleagues who were working within the department. So I was able to ask questions about, the workplace, get a better understanding about the department in general and what the culture was like, kind of get a better assessment of what it was all about before deciding whether or not it was a place that was going to be a good fit for my values, my interests, and my skills. Kati, it looks like we have a couple of responses here in the chat.
So some folks are indicating networking, the Indeed website,
Yeah.
Informal conversations with people that they have trusted and work there and letting them know how it really was.
Mm-hmm.
Most are saying Indeed.
Yeah, so sometimes you can find that out on the web, sometimes through these informal discussions with people. The bottom line is when we're helping someone to make a good job match, where that career profile bubble here indicates, all of that information about the person, what their skills are, what their interests, their values, what are their preferences? What are those key characteristics about the person? And then we want to look at the employer's needs and work culture analysis. What we're focusing on today is one of those areas. And the ultimate goal is to make a good job match. So before we get started, what is work culture to you? What are some definitions that you would define work culture? You can use the chat. Work culture has often been described as work culture is to the organization what personality is to the individual. It's sometimes hidden, but it's a unifying theme that brings meaning and direction to the organization. Kati, it looks like we have some responses coming in.
Yes, some people are indicating inclusivity,
Mm-hmm.
a shared set of values and expectations about how employees treat one another, a positive work environment, the environment you foster, supportive versus not, behavior that determines how people interact, and everything that isn't the essential tasks of the job and that can either enhance or get in the way of doing the work and enjoying the work.
Absolutely. Many of you mentioned those key areas of work culture, right? It's unique. Every work culture is unique. If you think about workplaces that you've worked within your career, each place maybe has their own unique aspects or unique characteristics. Work culture is also those unwritten rules that exist, and we'll talk a little bit more about those as we get in. Might have special stories or special languages, jargon, way that you communicate, different rules or behaviors are within the work culture. Each work culture has unique expectation of social norms. Some work cultures are very social, informal, some are very formal. One important characteristic about work culture is that they provide informal training and support. Natural supports are often overlooked at times by providers who may turn first to more program resources or resources that the employment specialist or counselor can provide. The workplace provides a wealth of opportunities for individuals to access natural supports. When you're working with someone and you're helping the person with their job match and you're getting a better understanding of what their interests are, what their skills, values, work-related preferences might be, you also want to encourage the job seeker to define what work culture means to them and reflect back what that is. You want to be helping the person find job opportunities that include aspects of a work culture that the person feels would be a good fit for them. So when you're working with someone, ask about work culture. Maybe you want to describe a little bit about what work culture is. Maybe we're not going to play it today, but there's a brief video that I've included here on this slide. When you get the slides back, we can include this. It has, maybe 1 or 2 minutes of people defining what work culture is. You could even maybe sit with someone and review that to just get people thinking about the importance of examining work culture. Anything else in the chat, Kati, before we move on?
Not at this time, no.
All right, thank you. So why is understanding work culture important? So why might it be important to understand work culture, whether it's for your own success or for the success of individuals that you're working with? Why do you think understanding work culture is important? You can use the chat. Kathy will keep an eye on responses.
In the chat, people are saying because a good fit saves everyone time, employer and worker both, and it helps in the decision-making process.
Has anyone, and you don't have to respond, you could just reflect on this, but has anyone gotten into a job and realized the work culture just isn't for them? This wasn't what you thought it would be. It really goes against maybe your values or other areas of your life that are important to you. Just as you mentioned, knowing that information beforehand to the extent that you can save you a lot of time, the job seeker, the employer. It could also save feelings of failure. You get into a job and maybe you can do the skills and you're fine with the technical aspects of it, but the work culture just isn't a good fit. You can begin feeling a certain way about that. You can begin internalizing that and thinking, I just, what a failure. I can't believe I can't fit in here, where some time and some assessment beforehand can help address some of that. Examining work culture provides an opportunity to gather important material about the company to assist job seekers. Work culture includes, as we mentioned how people interact with one another, what the values of an organization are, the physical characteristics, the hierarchical structure, and we'll discuss various ways to assess work culture in order to provide job seekers with valuable information about this critical component of a workplace. Understanding and fitting into the culture contributes to an employee's success and satisfaction on the job. So what makes a work culture inclusive? What are some things in your experience that make a work culture inclusive? What are some features, some aspects of a work culture that you can identify that makes that work culture inclusive? You can use the chat and Kati will keep an eye on responses.
I think we're still waiting on people to respond. So their sharing opinions are respected. Um, Active communications about the culture, training for supervisors on how to have hard conversations with staff,
Mhm.
building, exploring strengths versus weaknesses, morale boosting strategies.
So strengths-based, respect, morale boosting instead of morale sucking strategies. Looks like there might be one or two more that.
So someone is saying employees are part of the decision-making process with open, transparent communication, fair leadership who lead by example.
Transparency, fair leadership. Part of the decision making is a big part of what makes a work culture inclusive. And as we're thinking about those things, particularly the respect, equity, valuing differences, think about the importance of those types of workplaces when you're working with someone who maybe hasn't worked for a while, someone who might be changing careers, someone who might be advancing in their career and trying out something new. The Burton Blatt Institute of Syracuse, and I have the reference in the resource list, defines work culture as one that involves the full and successful integration of people. Inclusive work cultures involves this full and successful integration of people who are diverse into the workplace. And it's not simply just basic representation. It's a climate in which, the quote here on the screen says it all, in a climate in which respect, equity, positive recognition of differences are all cultivated. So thinking about understanding work culture and the relevance to our work, work culture can play a key role, a critical role in the job search, job match, and job support. The job seeker not only needs to know their own strengths and interests and preferences and what's important to them, but also what the employer's needs and preferences, requirements, and expectations are, and what the culture of that workplace is all about. I'm going to go through each of these work culture areas. I've included this resource, and we're going to use this at the end to kind of really look closely at a workplace that you're familiar with, whether it's your own workplace or one that you're knowledgeable about, to think about how our own workplaces, or one that you're familiar with, incorporates these work culture areas. When assessing work culture, we want to pay particular attention to these 8 areas on the slide. Being aware of these components that make up an organization's work culture is important in better understanding an employer's needs, as well as making a good job match. I'm sure I'm saying it over and over again, it's all about the job match. And many of you wrote in the chat how, paying attention to these types of organizational culture components is really going to result in a good job match, save time. We're going to review 8 of these. As we discuss, consider these elements in relation to your organization. So leadership. What is the style of leadership? Is it hierarchical, meaning is there a chain of command from maybe lowest members of the organization to highest? Is it egalitarian? Instead of reporting to a superior, all employees in an egalitarian company work collaboratively on tasks and behave as equals to some extent, or other type of leadership. More importantly, how do leaders or administrators communicate with employees? How do they communicate with each other? Are there formal and informal leaders? Think about your own workplace. Are there informal leaders who always raise their hand when there's a committee to be, to be chaired, someone that you might go to or many people in the organization go to for maybe informal support compared to formal leaders? What are the characteristics of both of those types of people? Is it, a warmth? Is it empathy? Think about that. And I have this list broken out that we'll send along with the PowerPoint that has all of these questions listed so that you can, when you're out doing work culture analysis and different assessments, you'll have that as a reference. In what ways do leaders gain trust of employees? Kati, is there anything in the chat before we move on?
So there are some people who are mentioning that diversity is valued. Employees have choices, including flexible scheduling around family responsibilities and medical appointments. And it's a culture that is collaborative and informal.
Mm-hmm. And then we think about management. How are decisions made? What role does the hierarchy in the organization play in decision making? Do employees make decisions, or are they mostly made by management? How are employees supported? Think about that in particular when you're working with someone who may not have worked for a while or who may need some additional natural supports on the job. How are employees supported? And then we go into looking at workplace practices. How are employees recruited, selected, and trained? What's the ongoing training and development at the organization? What are the opportunities for advancement? And how is wellness addressed? And work-life balance? Is paid time off for leave or sick days available? What are the policies and philosophies of the organization? What are the dress code policies and attendance policies? What's the organization's philosophy on hiring and pay and promotion? So these are some questions to allow you to begin thinking about and assisting the person in assessing a workplace to see if it's a good fit. Anything before we move on, Kati?
So people are providing feedback.
Yes.
So they're saying that being honorable and true to their word, transparency, the actions need to match the message, inclusivity, and the importance perception of lived experience and job development.
Yep. Great. And then people, this is another key area of a work culture that we want to be mindful of. What are the types of interactions between coworkers and supervisors and coworkers? Are they collaborative or independent? Are they mostly task-oriented discussions? Do people mostly just talk about work tasks, or are they social? In what ways do coworkers support each other? The mission, vision, and values of the organization. What are the organization's values and beliefs? In what ways does the organization's mission, vision, and values reflect an inclusive work culture? Anything before we move on, Kati? I just want to give time for any responses.
At this time.
Great. Work environment. So work environment has changed a bit with a lot of virtual and non-office based or hybrid work going on. But when you think about a company's work environment, if you are able to go into the company and see a physical space, what's hanging in offices and common areas that reflect inclusivity. Also, when you think about the workspace itself, are the work areas open? Are they, cubicles? Are they private offices? Is it cluttered? Is it neat? All of those elements of a work environment that can really impact someone's decision to choose that particular job. Communications, what's the manner of communication like? What's the type or degree and frequency between coworkers? Do people keep in each other updated pretty regularly? Are there regular meetings? Is there an expectation to respond pretty immediately to emails when you get them, or is there some flexibility for responding after hours? So those are the types of areas that we want to look for. If you're talking with coworkers or colleagues in an environment that you wish to be part of, and they say, yeah, I'm up all night, responding to emails, it's really an expectation, that could impact whether or not that's something that you would be interested in. How transparent is the organization in sharing information? So these 8 areas are really key components of a work culture. Are there other areas of a work culture that aren't reflected with these 8 that you might be thinking of? And what are those? Let's give another few seconds for people to respond. Other questions that might be prompted by some of these categories might be, when we think about communication on the job, what topics do coworkers talk about? Do they share personal information? If you're working with a job seeker and they're thinking about working in an organization, maybe having that information would be helpful in preparing of what types of discussions to have. If someone is already working and they're unsure of how much personal information to share, is it something that coworkers share pretty freely and regularly and they get support from one another, or is it more of a formal environment? Is creativity valued? Is there flexibility with completion of tasks or not? Kati, is there something in there? It looks like it.
So people are responding adjustments to feedback and requests by employees, being family oriented, leading people to feel heard and considered, responding and changing based on employee feedback, flexible with scheduling, boundaries. Global partners may also influence work culture.
Yeah, all of those great suggestions. And again, these are meant to be kind of a semi-structured way of gathering information about these 8 key components, but you might have other questions that might be helpful when you're out there thinking about a workplace or working with a job seeker to explore different workplaces. These work site features may look like social customs. So, each work site has different features, different social customs. So is there an event every year, fundraising event or other type of event? Do people go out every Friday after work or whatever it might be? I know in one of my previous positions, every first Friday of the month in the agency I worked for, the director of the agency kind of, once everyone left for the day, staff were there and he had, cheese and snacks, and we would just have a social opportunity to chat and meet with other colleagues that you didn't really meet with. And he really enforced that in a positive way. Certainly it wasn't required, but that was a social custom that took a little getting used to, particularly if you were the type of person who just went to work and just expected to do your job. Now, this first Friday of the month, you were kind of having this social gathering with your colleagues. What are the stories and roles? Every organization, if you think about your organization, are there kind of tales from, oh, remember back, during that conference or whatever it might be? What are those stories and roles and other features of a work site? As I mentioned earlier, the language that we use, is there certain jargon? Is there certain way that people speak? Even just communication methods, are people texting each other? In my department, many of our communications are very direct and to the point by email. And at first it takes a little getting used to that. And then you kind of realize, okay, this is how people interact. It's not something to be offended about. What are the social activities? Are there, opportunities to get engaged with social activities? What's the workspace like? And then again, the power and influence, who holds that power? Are there informal versus formal leaders? What's the style of leadership? The tone of interactions I kind of mentioned, are people, more formal, very casual, sarcastic, whatever that might be. Gathering places, do people tend to gather around the proverbial water cooler and chat after the weekend? Are there opportunities now in a virtual environment that people get together on a regular basis? I know in our department, we have a standing kind of Friday evening, like late afternoon get together where people can, just come on the Zoom and just, it's a informal get together and a nice opportunity to get support and just have a more casual social interaction with your coworkers. Celebrations. So this is interesting. And certainly something to be mindful of when you're working with individuals. Some organizations, they might bring in cakes and celebrate. And if you're the type of person that's uncomfortable, certainly that may not be the deciding factor of whether or not to take that job. But if you are already working and you're supporting someone and a supported employee in that work site, you might want to help that person manage those situations. If it's their birthday month and they know that they're going to be kind of celebrated and that's uncomfortable for them, maybe having some discussions about how to manage that. And then company image, what's the company's image like? So it's interesting thinking about those celebrations. Are there any types of celebrations within your organizations that you and your colleagues celebrate on a regular basis? I know for us, big ones like retirements, and sadly, whenever a loved one passes, that's something that we certainly don't celebrate, but acknowledge pretty regularly as a department. Are there celebrations within your workplace?
People are sharing work anniversaries.
Mm-hmm. So when it's the work anniversary, anything else?
Promotions, baby births,
Mm-hmm.
milestones such as getting a license. I guess also non-family related milestones as well. Birthdays, accomplishments.
Okay. So another area that you want to pay attention to is the job seeker's culture, and how maybe some of the ways people interact on the job might impact, how different cultures may experience different types of interactions. Helping the person assimilate, but also there may be opportunities to educate the job setting, right? Educate maybe some supervisors on the job or coworkers on how to be inclusive of different people's cultures. Some cultures, for example, may not want to, if you're working remotely with someone and helping someone, remotely find a job or remotely providing some support, maybe having the camera on isn't something that's the person feels comfortable with, respecting that. Also, sometimes on the job site, people tease and joke. That those might be areas to discuss with the person that you're working with. Even just finding casual conversation, chatting casually might be difficult for someone who hasn't worked for a number of years. discussing personal life. That might be something that people do pretty freely, or not, and then teaching a work task. So this was a study done a while ago, and if you notice, really, I think only 3 of these work site, how people interact on the job are actually around a work task, right? So teaching a work task, discussing work tasks, and helping with a task or helping with work. The others are really more interpersonal. So really being aware of how people interact interpersonally on the job so that you can help the person that you're working with, the job seeker, acclimate, understand, maybe some role plays. Diversity includes all of the ways in which people differ and includes different qualities that make up one individual or a group that are different from one another. It includes race, ethnicity, gender, age, national origin, religion, disability, affectional orientation, socioeconomic status, education, marital status, language, different. It could also be related to someone's ideas and ways of looking at things and the person's values. So features of an inclusive workplace culture, again, this is from the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse. Features of an inclusive workplace culture, representation, people had mentioned that in the chat a bit ago, includes the presence of people with disabilities throughout the organization and in various roles and leadership positions. Receptivity is having respect for any differences in the style in which employees work, including employers having flexibility to possibly tailor positions and tasks based on the employee's strengths and skills. Fairness refers to all employees having equal access to all resources, opportunities, meaning advancement opportunities, promotion opportunities, all networks within the organization. So if there are any sorts of committees or other networks, fairness refers to employees having equal access to all of those. So if you can think of these 3 areas when you're thinking about inclusive workplace culture, and think about, is the workplace doesn't have representation and not just the presence of people with disabilities or other diverse groups, but is it throughout the organization? This idea of receptivity, is there respect for differences, valuing someone's skills and strengths, and having that flexibility to modify tasks, and then fairness, that equal access. Any questions or comments before we move on?
Not at this time.
Okay. So learning about a company's workplace practices and culture. In employment services, we're always building relationships with employers. That's one of the key aspects of a good employment service, is really building relationships. You're building rapport with employers through maybe your job development efforts. Specifically, learning about a company's culture includes some of these suggestions on the slide, as well as, and maybe more importantly, that relationship building, that you're developing that rapport with businesses and employers in your area. But you can do some online research. Someone had mentioned Indeed. That's certainly a way to explore maybe the company's values, what some of their mission and vision statements, are they reflective of inclusivity? The company's employees, can you follow employees on LinkedIn? are they tweeting out regularly or in Twitter? Are they posting regularly about satisfaction? And, does it appear as though the employees are satisfied with their positions in the company? What are the company's values? Different questions during the interview. So think about what some questions might be in those 8 areas of work culture that we talked about a little bit ago that you might want to role play and encourage the job seeker to get some information around. And always when employers say, do you have any questions? When the job seeker can ask questions about work culture, I think that always shows an interest from the job seeker, as well as finding out that important information. Network with connections. Many of you talked about networking with people that are working in the job, or other colleagues that maybe there are professional networks that you might encourage the job seeker to join or network with. If someone was a CPA and maybe they're looking to get back into accounting, maybe there are professional CPA groups in their area or remote organizations that they can join to network with different connections. And then what do the employee benefits look like? Do they include mental health benefits? Are they inclusive benefits, or do they not include those? So these are some areas, these 6 factors can really help you learn about what the company's culture is and some of the workplace practices, again, to get a better understanding to make that good job match. So we're not gonna look at this right now, but it is interesting. This is a 2021 resource. I think it was March of 2021. So fairly current, describes 24 companies with standout and effective diversity and recruiting strategies, but it goes into a little bit more than that too. It talks about, what companies kind of stand out and what they're doing. Some companies on the list specifically mention disabilities in their recruitment. Liberty Mutual's on the list, Infosys, Microsoft, they mention specifically policies and practices around disabilities. Most refer to general diversity and inclusion plans, but I just kind of pulled one statement out just to read it. Apple takes, and this is from the list, Apple takes diversity hiring very seriously. In 2020, they hired 64% more employees from underrepresented communities and filled 43% of open leadership positions in the US with underrepresented candidates. They also released strong action plans to increase diversity hiring in all business areas, including research and development. And in 2021, Apple announced several large projects to combat racial injustice as part of its 100 million racial equity and injustice initiative. So that's just to kind of give you a peek into what this resource describes. Several companies, 24 with these standout plans. It's important to do that research, and kind of this just highlights one of those an opportunity to do some online research, knowing that companies are making this effort in a very significant way, and with data to back it up, and plans in the future can help maybe guide some of your job development efforts, or at least give you a better understanding of what some of these standout companies are doing in terms of diversity, recruiting, and diversity and inclusion plans. So I was hoping, and we do have time, to spend a little bit of time in the remaining 10 minutes to talk about your own employment setting and really kind of get into, I bolded 4 of these, workplace practices, people, work environment, and communications, to really look at where your company is, and let's answer some of those questions. So you can use the chat we're on a webinar, so we're unable to do breakout rooms, which is fine. It might be more beneficial as a group to talk about this, but let's review what, in terms of these 4 areas of work culture that we talked about: the people, work environment, and then we'll talk about workplace practices and communications. But let's talk about, and you could use the chat, what are the types of interactions between coworkers, like whether it's your own current job or maybe a job that you're familiar with, or maybe something that you're thinking of, that a job seeker is interested in pursuing, and you kind of have some familiarity with it. But think about your own position or your own job site, or one that you're familiar with. What are the types of interactions between coworkers? What is it like between supervisors and coworkers? You don't have to answer all of these questions. So maybe we'll just take on, what are the types of interactions between coworkers?
So people are mentioning team meetings.
Team meetings. Kati and I are on a team, and we have a meeting once a week, and it's a very efficient meeting. But it's also an opportunity to catch up with our team members on what they've been up to over the weekend, and just, there's a little bit of time for socializing on that call. Are there others in the chat, Kati?
Yes, eating lunch together, staff meetings, support groups, trainings, on-site events, lunch and learns, wellness events, virtual events, supportive, positive, welcoming team supervision, a mix between cliques and also supportive.
That's important information too, right? So if you're working with a job seeker to, find a good match, this is all information you could be really beneficial to the person. Think about, are people collaborative, or are they more independent? Are people more task oriented or social? Are those interactions more task oriented? And then you can also think about the last question in this category: in what ways do coworkers support each other?
So people are saying celebrating holidays or potlucks.
So social celebrations. Maybe we can move into looking at work environment. What's hanging in the office common areas? Are there, when we go back to looking at the Burton Blatt fairness, are there opportunities listed that everyone can partake in? Are there, not clubs, but committees and other opportunities that are maybe listed generally, not just only certain people can access those opportunities? What about virtual areas and workspaces? Do people have their cameras on, off? What's the expectation?
So we have sharing work successes, celebrating an employee of the month.
Yeah, all those celebrations. How about work environment? Are offices private? Does it mean something when the door is closed? Does that kind of signal that you really don't want to interrupt that coworker, or is it more flexible? So again, these are really areas to be looking for. What are the physical or virtual signs of inclusivity? Does the company, think about your own company or one you're familiar with, have mission statements and value statements and the vision inclusive of people with disabilities and all diversity and inclusion?
So someone also mentioned private offices, but we have an open door policy.
I know I have some coworkers who I know if I call, they'll answer the phone, or they'll send me a quick text that say, "What's up? Can I call you right back?" So kind of knowing, and I reciprocate with that, knowing that it's important if you're going to pick up the phone. We typically respond, and communicate by email, but if it's a phone call, it's not something urgent, but it's nice to know that the colleague is available. What about in office spaces? Are there any signs of inclusivity? Or even just in general, what's the work environment like? Is it an open floor plan, private offices, neat, cluttered?
So someone is sharing that shared office space and office space is limited.
Yep. So that's important information to know. How will the job seeker feel about a shared office space? Is that something that would be conducive to their interest in a good job match? And then think about workplace practices. How are employees recruited, selected, and trained? Is there formal training, or is it, you kind of pair up with another coworker and that's how you're trained? Is there opportunities for ongoing training and development? So think about your own workplaces or one that you're familiar with. You can answer that question or move down to even some of the others here. What are the opportunities for advancement? How is wellness addressed? A lot of companies now are identifying and promoting wellness plans. And a lot of those are listed on their websites, that they are valuing work-life balance, valuing employee wellness. And sometimes you can see that reflected in their vision, values, mission statements. Anything, Kati?
Not at this time.
And what is the manner of communication, including, the type and degree, frequency between coworkers, between leaders and employees? How do people in your organizations typically communicate with one another? Or a workplace that you're familiar with? We, as often as we can, jump on a Zoom meeting instead of just on the call so that we can see each other, particularly when we were really 100% remote and we weren't really seeing each other with any frequency. We kind of got into the habit of using Zoom and, being able to see one another. And then how transparent is the organization sharing information? So think about, when do you find out information, important information? Is the company open with that? Again, that's very reflective of the type of work culture. Could also be reflective of the diversity and inclusion practices of an organization. Anything, Kati, before we?
Yes, we have an extra comment here stating extra pay for participating in wellness fairs or completing preventative care. And I think we've seen that as well within our organization at Rutgers. There are some incentives to stay, to participate in wellness programs.
Absolutely. And lots of opportunities too, Kati, different webinars that have, that the university provides. Anything else in the chat?
And also someone is mentioning flexible hours.
Mm-hmm. So flexible hours, certainly a wellness and work-life balance practice that many organizations are including. So I'm going to move on to summarize, because we are almost at the top of the hour. So just to summarize, knowing the characteristics of a workplace can play a critical role in the job search, job match, and job support. So, we're not just talking about once the person's on the job and kind of finding out this information right then, which might happen. And this is certainly useful information to have at that point, but also to inform the job search, to inform job development efforts, to hopefully make a good job match. The job seeker not only needs to know their own strengths and preferences, but also what's expected of the employment setting, and how we learn about work culture, as you just kind of really flooded the chat with many suggestions, is using and maybe helping the person develop their own networks, to better understand culture of different organizations and companies, researching the company, online research. You had mentioned Indeed, the company website. Check out and follow on LinkedIn people that work for that company that could shed some light into what that company's culture is about. If you see, lots of, you can kind of get a feel when you're on LinkedIn of what someone's perception is of their organization, and you can get a really good sense of, particularly if they're very satisfied and feel successful there. Informational interviews, so helping to create informational interviews with a job seeker where you're not going to get the job, but you're helping the person to ask about specific, maybe even these work culture areas that are going to be really helpful if they are interested in choosing that particular job or that industry, visiting and observing. So whether you're going with the person and you're kind of informally observing a work site and some of the interactions and some of the environment, what the physical environment looks like, can also be certainly helpful ways to assess work culture. So before we end, we have about 3 minutes. Are there any questions or comments or any anything related to what we talked about? I will put in, while you're thinking about your questions, if you have any or comments, a plug for next week. It's not really part of a series. I mean, it doesn't matter if you attended today. So if you have colleagues who are interested, we're hosting another advanced SE skills training on helping individuals with work gaps and helping in a strengths-based way individuals to address work gaps that they might have. So if there are no questions or comments, this is a workplace resource that is really kind of an interesting, you'll see, you can go in and check it out. It has lots of different resources, other resources that you might find helpful, more just supported employment in general, and then also some specific references from today's training. And then the evaluation, Kati usually puts that in the chat as well.
Thank you, Joni. As mentioned before, we are SAMHSA funded, and as part of receiving this funding, we are required to evaluate all of our trainings and events. So if you would please take a moment to either scan the QR code that you see on your screen, and I will also share the link to our survey in the chat box, whichever is easier for you. We would definitely appreciate your participation. So next slide, please. And we also have a podcast channel that we invite you to check out. It's called Flourishing at Work, a plan for helping professionals. And you may find this podcast in either Spotify, Apple Music, or Podbean. And if you've missed any previous webinars that may have been scheduled and you might have missed it for whatever reason, we invite you to check out our products catalog. You may access this library of webinars by scanning the QR code that you see on your screen. Next slide, please. And as a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be posted on our website within 7 days, and everyone will also receive a certificate of completion. We invite you to follow us at our different social media channels using the handles that you see on your screen. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you so much for your participation, and thank you, Joni. Any parting words?
No, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.